For those of you who are just joining the webinar, thank you for joining. We will be starting in just about 2 minutes. Give everyone a chance to join. We're about 2 minutes from the top of the hour. While we're waiting for those who have joined, I would like to thank everyone for joining the Dissecting Return and Risk webinar, a framework for building investable life science companies. I would like to also cordially invite everyone to join us at Resi San Diego, taking place alongside the Bio International Convention on June 22nd in person, followed by virtual partnering days both that week and the following week. Resi features about 300 to 400 early stage investors. So if you're raising seed, Series A or Series B, or if you're looking to talk to the people from large pharma who are specifically interested in early stage innovation, those are usually known as the external innovation scouts. You'll find plenty of them at Resi. So we look forward to seeing you at Resi San Diego. If you're participating in bio partnering starts in the afternoon and Resi partnering starts early in the morning. Bio is also quite light on partnering on the Monday, so it's a perfect time to knock out your investor meetings at Resi. So please swing by, have a number of great meetings with investors, and then if you're attending bio, there's nothing like kicking off your bio partnering with a bunch of investor meetings already done under your belt. That'll give you the confidence to really kill it at bio. And we hope to see you there. So with that said, let's get started. So again, for those of you who are just joining, this is the Dissecting Return and Risk webinar, which will present a framework for building investable life science companies. And we would like to invite you to participate in Resi San Diego and Resi Boston. Resi San Diego is June 22nd alongside the Bio International Convention, followed by virtual partnering days. It specializes in companies raising seed, Series A, Series B, and looking for pharma scouts from external innovation, who are usually the pharma scouts who are specifically looking for early stage assets. So come partner, over 300 investors, no conflict with bio partnering. Because bio partnering starts in the afternoon, we start in the morning. So get a bunch of great investor meetings under your belt. You'll find more early stage investors at Resi than you will at bio, and knock out that experience, have that great experience to get you started on your convention week in June. So we're joined by Rick Berenson, Managing Director at Berenson Catalyst, and he will give an introduction of himself shortly. My name is Shigato Das. I'm the President and COO of Life Science Nation. And this QR code gives you an easy way to register for Resi. So feel free to scan it and then move forward to getting some capital under your belt. For this webinar, we're actually offering a great discount for the full Resi Pass, so $500 off the 5-day Resi bundle. That includes the 1 in-person day and 4 virtual days, both the week of convention and the week after. Or you can use that $500 to take it off the bundle package for San Diego and Boston. So if you're really serious about fundraising, that's what you want to do. We're also offering $200 off for virtual access, where you can access the virtual partnering with Resi San Diego, and $200 off the audience access pass. That gives you a pass to attend Resi in person, but does not give you access to the partnering system. So Resi is one of the warmest conferences that I've ever been to. By warmest, I mean not too formal. It's very easy to shake hands, very easy to meet people. That's what everyone is there to do. Much less formality. So take advantage of that if you're in town for a convention to, again, get some great investor contacts under your belt. At Life Science Nation, besides the Resi conference that everyone knows us and loves us for, we offer a very extensive investor database. These are investors that we actually interview. So we talk to them, we get the inside baseball, the inside scoop, and put that in our database. So it contains several thousand very detailed profiles, actually more than several thousand, I think 4,000 or 5,000 very detailed profiles of investors, and lets you very quickly find investors that are good fits for you based on your therapeutic area, modality, region, how much money you're raising. So within a few minutes, you can do what would otherwise take you years in finding the correct investors for your company. And it includes not only detailed profiles, but very extensive contact information that makes it very easy for you to reach out to those investors and get meetings with them. And we also offer entrepreneurial education. So we're one of the only outfits that teach specifically how to fundraise, how to turn yourself, who may be more of a science person, into the marketing and sales phenom that you need to be in order to raise money. And I'm sure Rick will have some commentary on that. These are examples of some of the investors who are regularly at our conferences across 10 different investor types. Our conferences have anywhere from 300 to 400 investors for Resi Boston, Resi San Diego, and over 800 investors for the Resi we do at the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. So if you are a fundraising company, there's no better conference to attend than Resi. And of course, at Resi, you can pitch. And when you pitch at Resi, you pitch to a panel of well-aligned investors for your modality, as well as an active audience. So sometimes at conferences you go and you pitch to an empty room. Here you are guaranteed to have a bunch of well-aligned investors who not only listen to your pitch, but are obligated to interact with you and give you feedback. And of course, then you can follow up with those investors. So pitching at Resi is really a great opportunity. And if you win our pitch contest, then you can get some great prizes, such as free registrations to future Resis. Finally, before we jump into this, I thank Rick for being so patient. We offer an investability report. This is free, complimentary. Go to go.lifesciencenation.com/LSN Labs CAR. And what it is an AI-powered assessment report that we've custom designed to look at your pitch deck. You answer a few questions, and it gives you back a SWOT analysis of your pitching materials and your company. So it's a really great tool to fine-tune your pitch. And finally, shoot me an email at s.das@lifesciencenation.com, and I'll be glad to give you a number of well-aligned investors that are probably not on your radar, along with their detailed profiles and contact information. So please reach out and I'll be happy to do that. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Rick. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and Rick is going to share his presentation. And Rick, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sagato. Let's see here. Let's see if we can get shared. Excuse me. If anybody, one of you out there has a cure for spring allergies, sign me up. Okay. So first of all, thank you all for taking the time to come to this webinar. I'm excited to talk to you about this framework that I've been working on with my colleagues here in Boston on how to dissect risk and return and shape your company so that it is more likely to attract investment. What we're going to cover today is a structured approach to fundraising and to improving your results. It's a framework that I hope will become kind of a common language between entrepreneurs and investors and give you a way to organize what often must seem like random feedback that you get from investors. My theory on that is that investors are making gut decisions by and large. You know, they've got a bunch of things they've seen and they decide whether they like something or not. And then if you actually can get them to sit still long enough to try and explain why they decided not to invest in you, which is rare because it doesn't actually pay them a lot to do that. It pays them more to go and evaluate the next deal. But if you can get them to do that, it's like asking a large language model to explain how it came up with the results, right? Or any neural network. It really can't. So it comes up with a rationalization, and those rationalizations can seem very random. But creating a coherent framework for investors and also for entrepreneurs can overcome that and give you a greater ability to figure out what you need to do. So, core takeaway from this should be that you should be thinking explicitly about returns and risk when you're pitching your company, and you should talk about this explicitly with the investors. So, with that as a preview, first of all, let me introduce myself. Rick Berenson. I'm a serial life science entrepreneur. I've spent more than 30 years in life sciences. I've had a dozen C-level roles at startups, mostly CEO. I've raised almost $100 million for the companies that I have helped to lead across all aspects of life sciences, so therapeutics, devices, diagnostics, and digital. I have used the Resi conference extensively. For two of my companies, I have participated in the Resi Pitch Challenge, and I have won both times. So I have some experience in what it takes to give a good pitch. I've also been on the executive committee for Massachusetts Medical Angels in Boston since its founding. And I will talk a little bit more about Mass Medical Angels in a moment. I'm a former McKinsey and Company consultant, and I have a law and business degree from Harvard back in the early modern era, as my kids like to say. So, what is Mass Medical Angels? It's an angel group based here in Boston that is unusual for several reasons. The first is that all of our members are people out of the industry. We don't have any real estate investors who are just going along for the ride. These are successful startup executives across the 4Ds. They're clinicians, they're big pharma and big med tech executives, and consultants who are there as investors, not looking for business, in regulatory and reimbursement and so forth. We have more than 80 members. And what we're known for, in addition to what I think is terrific quality of the colleagues that we've been able to collect over time, is the quality of our early stage diligence. We do much more detailed diligence at an early stage than other companies do. And I think that partially as a result of that, our overall track record has been much better than average. So a typical success rate for investors is that between 20 and 30% of their early stage investments have some kind of a positive return. But we've had about a 50% success rate, which is pretty good. And I think the reason is that we have done much more structured thinking about it, but we've continually worked to improve the process that we use to do this, the result of which is this framework that I'll be talking to you about today. So now let me tackle the question of why is it that life science companies fail? And the challenge is that most of the companies that get started are failing for technical, but also other reasons, market and so forth. And this hasn't changed for decades. Despite this, we've got all these startups that are starting. We've got a lot of regional life science ecosystems that are operating as they always have. And something needs to be done in order to address this. If you look at the success rates across the industry, in class 2 devices, the simplest devices to move forward, you've got a 30% success rate, but for everything else, it's lower. For class 3 devices, invasive devices, and diagnostics, it's 20%. For drugs, this is technical failure. It's like 6.2%. And for digital, the success rate historically is even lower for lots of reasons that we could talk about later if you're interested. But even this 6% success rate for drugs may be overstated because it's looking at the number of companies, or I should say number of candidates that make it all the way through into the market, but doesn't talk about the candidates that fail when they get out there because they've just missed the market. Maybe there's been competition that's come along. Maybe the need wasn't as great as they thought. And then, of course, there are those that fail because we're going to go do drug discovery and you never find a candidate. They may fail because the clinical costs were higher than planned and they can't raise money for it. Or just because the team can't figure out how to move the whole thing forward. So there are lots of reasons that apply to drug failures, and all of these also apply to failures of companies in other categories. But the bottom line is that there are all these risks, and these risks stack up. When you look at an early stage company, there are 7 different types of risk that any investor is going to look at and think about and evaluate you on before they make a decision about whether they're interested. They're going to ask market questions. And this is a super common thing that we've seen is that companies will come in and they will pitch and say, we're trying to raise money to get to IND. And they're raising two, three, $4 million to get there. The challenge, though, is that if they do get to IND, can they raise the significantly greater amount of money they probably need to do phase one or phase two? And often the reason is no, because they haven't identified a market that is big enough and attractive enough that they're going to have a potentially differentiated role in. And so many investors will just not participate in a phase one round because the market isn't there.
This is the
Uh,
famous Valley of Death, right, Rich?
that's right. That's right. The problem is you got to be thinking about market from day one and making the case really solidly that your target product profile, whether it's a drug or whether it is a device or something else, really is going to solve a real unmet need. Technical risk is what almost everybody focuses on in life sciences. Three components to it: engineering risk, which is can you actually make it? Can you make the product that meets the target product profile? And then there's efficacy risk. If you do meet the profile, will it work? And there's safety risk. Economic risk, people rarely address. Is this thing going to actually be profitable if you make it and sell it? Regulatory risk is not what most people think it is, because if the product works, it's going to get approved. By works, I mean it's efficacious and safe. Regulatory risk is, have you actually figured out the cost of the clinical trials required to get regulatory approval? And that makes for a huge capital risk in the investment profile. Execution risk, can the team actually do it? Financing risk, now we have seen a lot of deals that have come in that we have not gone through with because of financing risk, because we doubt that the team is going to actually be able to raise the funds that they need to do. And when I get to the end, I'm going to talk more about financing risk, but a really good way to mitigate financing risk is to engage with the kind of program that Resi and Life Science Nation offered. This is what I've done in the past, is that if you have a really solid, well-designed financing program, you significantly mitigate that financing risk and reduce the overall risk of the enterprise. And then the final is exit risk. Are there enough acquirers out there? Will you actually have a good strategic fit, and so forth? But the truth is that most early stage companies are uninvestable because there are too many things that aren't known. You don't know if the technology is going to work. You don't know if the business company is really a business. And the founders lack the skill to tell the investable story and make the ROI proposition. And the result is that too much risk, and investors can't get comfortable. Now, if you ever heard the term comfortable, this is a term of art that says too much risk. They're not sure enough that the chance of success is high enough that they are comfortable making the investment. So with that challenge, with so many companies not having addressed the full story, what can you do about it? There's a big mountain you have to climb to get from where you are as a scientist up to the top where the money is. And the process for doing this has two major components. The first is you have to have an investable plan. And the second is that you have to have an effective fundraising campaign. And I'm going to talk about each of these two components for the rest of this talk.
Yeah, and Rick, I think one thing a lot of the audience is probably wondering too is a lot of this sounds like something that the investor can evaluate after a first meeting, or maybe more than a first meeting, but at least a first meeting. I think a lot of people struggle to just get that first meeting. So that's, I think, part of the obstacle as well. So how
Yeah,
do you
well,
express some of this before even getting that meeting?
I think that is dead on. So often, and I've seen this, I've come to Resis as an investor as well as a fundraiser. And so often the notes I get or the descriptions I get are, hi, my name is John Smith, and I was born in Iowa, and my great-grandmother had this disease, and so I thought I'd go on a mission to try and cure it, and we've come up with something great. Why don't you meet with me? And I think it's fantastic that there's motivation, but I really don't have time to read about all that background when I'm skimming through to look for something. You need to get to the point quickly. We have X solution to this big a market, and it's going to cost us this much to get there. We think your return that you could make on this project is such and such. So if you can tell me a quick elevator story like that without going into all the background, you're much more likely to get me to pay attention to you and schedule a meeting. So in terms of what the components are, that's what we're going to be talking about now in what it takes to make an investable plan. So something that most fundraisers in the life science and elsewhere don't do is to focus on the actual customer for the business. And your actual customer in an early stage company is the investor, and your product is your stock. If you don't sell your stock, you're never going to get the money to be able to go after the mission that you've got to serve patients. So your first and primary customer is the investor, and you have to figure out how to package what you've got, which is your stock, in a way that's attractive. Now, investors are most interested in getting a return on their investment. Sure, they're interested in having a good impact on society by having something that treats patients, but what they really want, and they're only going to invest if they can get a return. And they know that they're only going to get a return if there's some acquirer who's going to buy it, because it is very rare that an early stage company is going to go public, just incredibly rare. They don't really want to be stuck in a company that's just going to allegedly generate dividends in the future, just not something that they're interested in. So that means that you also have to have a story early on for why it is you're going to be attractive to an acquirer. And what an acquirer ultimately cares about are patients, clinicians, and payers, which is what you're probably focused on from the beginning. And of course, you have to worry about that. But from a pitching the company perspective, it's kind of the third level of the story that you have to tell. So a key prerequisite to any sales process, and in this case of selling stock, is to get into the heads of your potential investors. You have to talk their language and speak to their motivation for investing. And despite what it may say on some websites, their motivation is not advancing science. Their motivation may be to improve outcomes for patients, but fundamentally, their motivation is make investments that make money. Now, there's another reason that startup executives need to think like an investor, and that is that any person who is a startup executive is actually making a bigger investment out of their personal portfolio in the company than the investor is, right? Angels, VCs, they will put money in, but they will spread it across 10 to 20 things. Startup execs may put some money in, but they're putting 100% of their time. There's no diversification. There's no portfolio on that time. And they're putting it all into one thing, likely. And so that means that when you're evaluating a company to be engaged with or to stay engaged with, you have to be thinking like an investor yourself, because you are investing in that company. So now, what is the proposition that you have to make to an investor? It's very simple. Give us money, we will go execute our plan, and you're going to get back a good MOIC. MOIC is multiple on invested capital, and this is a really critical term for attracting investors in early stage things, because that's how professional investors measure their success. How many times of their money will they make by investing through their fund? This is what any limited partner who's going to invest in a venture fund is asking. How many times my money am I going to make back? And this is actually how the funds are measured in the marketplace. What kind of return did you give? If it isn't over 2 and better over 3 times over the life of the fund, that's a failed fund, and they're not going to raise money again. And there's a whole structure about how the LPs get their money back. But the key thing here is that everybody is looking at this as the measure. And while if you go to business school, you will learn all about the risk-adjusted net present value and internal rates of return and so forth, that is not how venture investors are thinking about this fundamentally. The two are related, right? They're different sides of the same coin, but to talk in investors' language, you want to talk about the multiple on invested capital. So they're trying to achieve this multiple on the uninvested capital. And just to compare what the world looks like, if you invest in a fund, or if you're an investor and you invest in treasury bonds, over a 7-year period, you can expect to get something like a 1.04, 1.35x return on your money. If you invest in public stocks, you could expect a higher return, maybe something on the order of 1.7x over this time. Now, public stocks are riskier; they're more volatile than a bond is. When you get into venture investing, the returns are much more volatile. So the expectation is that you're going to get between a 2 and a 3x return on your investment. But the top performing funds, the ones that are really successful in raising more money, are all doing better than 3x. So keep that in mind. This is not something that they're just picking up because they want to. It's because this is what the market is demanding if they're going to be able to stay in the business of investing in early stage companies. So let's talk now about the expected multiple on invested capital. So if you've got a target for your portfolio and you're making a bunch of investments, every one of them, the expected, and that means whatever you think the potential return is multiplied by the probability of success. So the expected return had better be at least as big as your target, because you can't make it up on volume, right? If you accept a lower expected multiple on invested capital on any investment, then all the other ones need to be higher if you're going to hit your target. The expected multiple is, as I said, the product of the potential multiple on invested capital and the chance of investment success, which is 1 minus the chance of failure. So here's an example. Company comes in and they said, if you invest at this price today, we're making the case that you could make a 20 times return on your money. Now that may sound extravagant to you, but given the failure rates in the industry, if it's a drug and it's a really high likelihood of success drug, in other words, it's got a 10% chance of success, you better, a 10% chance of success times a 20x return is only a 2x. That is barely good enough for an investor to be interested in it. And so this 20x number then becomes a really important concept, and it's what I call the potential multiple on invested capital, which is defined as how many times over an investment that an investor is considering making in your next round, say, could that investment realistically return on the original capital. This is not in your wildest dreams. It is not, well, if we all fall apart. It is, I can tell a reasonable story where we're going to exit to a big pharma company, and here's kind of where we're going to exit to, where the amount of return that the investor is going to get is going to be X. You divide that by the amount of capital that's being invested in this round, and that gives you your potential multiple on invested capital.
So Rick, what's the best way to get an idea of this? Is it by looking at comparable deals? And maybe you're going to cover this, but
I am.
how do companies get to this?
That is the next section, and I will talk about that in some detail, but a lot more detail is available through some materials that we are developing. But in any case, this will at least give you an overview. But just to conclude here, the key question for an investor is the PMOIC, the potential multiple on invested capital, worth the risk that the company won't succeed, won't be able to successfully execute. And to look at this overall framework from a 10,000-foot view, there's an investment opportunity that an investor is looking at. And that opportunity produces a potential multiple on invested capital. Given the risk in the opportunity, and given whatever the hurdle is for the investor, what the expected multiple they're trying to make, there's a required potential multiple. And the question is, do those two match? That's the fundamental question that an investor's asking, and that you really need to, as an entrepreneur, be ready to answer for the investor in that initial pitch. So now let's talk about how do you think about returns in a structured way? What is this potential multiple on invested capital? So the potential value returned is the value at the exit times the portion of the company that the investor will own at the exit. How do you get at the value at the exit? Well, most people think it's through comparables, and comparables are very useful, but my view is that the comparables are really there to confirm your modeling of the value to the acquirer. What you really want to do, and this is a lesson that I learned in one of my companies where I had a board member who was hammering on me for not doing this, and I sort of dismissed it, and I really regret the fact that I did, is you want to say, okay, somebody's going to require me, and then, if assuming my product is working, this is what kind of revenue they can get. This is how much it's going to cost them to complete the clinical trials if they have to do that. This is how much it's going to cost to support the product in the field if they have to do that or to launch it. So you model that out and you tell that story and you get a value from that. This is an MBA kind of exercise, but it's very valuable to do. And then you say, okay, it's worth $1 billion to the acquirer, but I'm not going to get all of that because why would they pay $1 billion for something that's only worth $1 billion? And so maybe if it's a competitive auction, I'll get half of it. And then you go out and you find some comparables to say, yeah, $500 million for something in this category is not unreasonable. So that's the way you get at and make a good case around what the potential exit value is. It's enormously important for you to do this because if you rely on the investor to do it, unless they get super excited, which is unlikely unless they happen to just have a bug for whatever it is you're doing, they're not going to do this calculation. If you want to get them excited, show them how much money they're going to make. So the second piece of this is how much of the company will they own at the exit? And so I want to talk a little bit about dilution. So if you assume a $150 million exit, and let's just say that you have to raise $3 million to get there, that would be pretty cool. And you're going to raise it at a $6 million pre-money valuation. So you're going to sell a third of the company to get that $3 million. And then at the point of the $150 million exit, a third of the company is going to go to the investors, 2/3 goes to the founders, woohoo. And the multiple, 50 million on a 3 million, is a 16.7x. So now you've got a 16.7x multiple on invested capital. And as long as your chance of success is, better than 80%, sorry, better than 20%, this is attractive. But what if it takes more than $3 million? So let's take a look at the scenario where you have to raise a second round. You have to raise $12 million more at a $13 million valuation. You're going to sell another 48% of the company. Well, now it looks like this, $150 million exit. The first round owns less of the company. The second round owns a big chunk. The first round is now getting a 28 million return, which is a 9x. And so if your chance of success is only 20%, this is not going to be all that attractive. If you look at it from 3 rounds, let's just say that you actually have to raise a total of, what is that? 3 plus 12, 15 plus 35, $50 million. So you have to raise $50 million to get your $150 million exit. And then on this, as you break out the shares, the last round's going to get a 2.1x. This is before they've actually gotten the exit. And so 2.1x is not all that attractive for somebody who's looking for a 2x. And these guys are going to get a 3x. The first round gets a 4.3x. If there's any risk in this deal at all, they're not going to be interested. And so the potential return is just too low, and you're not going to be able to raise the money. Now, one of the things that you might say is, well, I don't really need all this money. Well, what drives how much money you need? Well, how big are the clinical trials is usually the biggest use of cash in a life science company. Are they large? Are they complex? There are things that drive this. Is it going to be expensive to make the product? If you have a new biologic that's packaged in a nanoparticle that's coated in something, that could be really expensive. And that will affect developing that process can be expensive. And then if for devices in particular, or for healthcare IT, you need commercial traction before you're going to get to exits, you have to plan for that amount of money as well. And the bottom line is that if you've got a lot of capital requirement, that's bad. It's going to make more dilution. It's going to take longer. And there's a greater risk of future down rounds, all of which companies tend to underestimate or understate. And if you're not honest about this to yourselves and can't clearly tell the story, you're going to have a problem making the case for return. And then after you've done all this, you then need to build a pro forma cap table that says, here's what the returns look like for you. And so here's an example with a $125 million exit value, 3 rounds of financing, 1, 6.5, and 10 million. This shows sort of who's getting what in the end. There's an option pool that's built into it. And here are the returns. And depending upon what the risk assessment is, this could be attractive or not, but you're not going to know if you don't actually, if you can't actually tell this story.
Rick, this is a great example. I think it really illustrates this. Would be a lovely template.
Well, it is in fact a template.
Oh, who would have guessed?
Who would have guessed? Okay, so now having talked about structured analysis of return, let me talk about structured analysis of risk. So what is risk? Risk fundamentally is uncertainty. The future is unknown, and anybody can only use the information available to judge what the chance of success of a company is. And that information typically comes from company provided materials. And remember, as an investor, it's like peeling an onion. When you walk in for your first meeting, all the investor sees is on what's on the outside of the onion. And based on what's on the outside of the onion, they have to decide, am I going to peel it and ask some questions and dig into it more? And then if they like those questions, they may dig and get into your data room. But it's a layered approach to uncovering the information. And they may also likely go do independent diligence, particularly around market, sometimes around technology, because they often don't have the internal expertise for this. But fundamentally, to an investor, if they're not sure about something, if you told a great story, but I'm not sure I believe it because the evidence isn't strong enough, you're going to see more risk. It can also, particularly if you're making a claim that is kind of dubious, or if the plan is weak, or if the amount of evidence is weak, all of these things are challenging. And what then the question is it intriguing enough that they're willing to buy some additional information to try and clarify this, either by investing time in meeting with you again or in doing some diligence, or possibly, and we'll talk about this later, by making a micro investment. And this is a new modality that we'll talk about. So from a risk evaluation perspective, I'm going to offer this framework, this way of thinking about risk. And there are 4 pieces to it broken down into 2 different groups. The first is, what is the current uncertainty about success? And that current uncertainty is based on the claims that you're making. This is the story the company is telling about why they're going to succeed. And there are a whole bunch of pieces that you have to cover in doing that. And then for each of those claims, what evidence does the company present to support those claims? And the strength of those evidence drives whether the claims will be believed. The next bit, there are some pieces of information that just aren't available. The things that are most salient on this are technical risks. Is this really going to work? Well, you won't know until you get into early phase 2 or phase 3 or even approval. But it's resolvable eventually, but there may be other risks that you can resolve earlier for less money. And then the last component to risk is if a claim resolves negatively, and we'll talk about what resolving a claim means in a couple of minutes. If a claim resolves negatively, you say that the market for treating this particular subtype of heart failure is 10 million people a year. And it turns out that in fact, it's only 1 million a year. The question is, could you pivot and target the company at a different indication? That would be one example. Or if your drug fails, do you have a backup drug? That's what pivotability is about, is can you change what you're doing? And I'll talk briefly about that in a few minutes. But let me come back to the question of the claims. So as I said, the claims are the case that the company makes. And in order to make a complete case, you have to say that the product will be effective and it will address a large, real, and unmet need, that the product economics will be solid. It's going to be deliverable with a high net margin with justifiable development costs, and that the team can successfully raise money, meet the milestones, and get to an exit. I mean, that's at its core the story that every company needs to tell, but it has to instantiate that. It has to give it specific details to fill this out. And when you're filling out the details, there are a lot of components to this. So inside market, there are 4 different things that you really need to touch upon. I'm not going to go through all of this but just the takeaway from this slide is that you really need to address a bunch of these issues in your deck. And if there's anything that you have not addressed, investors will judge that that's probably because there isn't, that maybe because there isn't a good answer. There's a super high risk around, for example, the cost of this. Now, maybe if it's a small molecule drug, they're not going to worry that much about the cost. But if it is, a large molecule drug or a complex device, they may. And if you haven't talked about it, then it's going to be a risk area that may make them walk away.
Yeah, and
So
one thing I wanted to note to the audience is Rick is off giving a lot of great information, especially on this slide, and we will be distributing a recording of this. So if you're furiously taking notes or have a note taker, that's great, but don't worry, you'll have access to this recording. So
yeah,
sorry.
and I apologize for the mouse type on this slide. The so what that I want you to take away from this short discussion of this slide is that there are a lot of things that you really have to cover. And as Sugata says, this list will be available. So what do you have to do to be successful? We have to make sure that you have claims that cover all the areas of risk, told the complete story. You've got strong, credible evidence to support each claim, particularly the ones that may be more controversial. And remember, not controversial to you. If you're running a company, you're a true believer, so everything makes sense to you. To an investor, they don't know you from a hole in the wall, unless they do, in which case you should definitely be pitching them. So they're not going to believe anything that you say, and you're going to have to back it up. And for those claims that you don't yet have reliable evidence, you have to then present a plan for how you're going to resolve those risks, because fundamentally, the plan that you're raising money for is a plan for resolving those risks. So you started off with, here's how you could get a return. And then there's a whole bunch of questions about whether that's going to work or not, right? The promise is, give me money, I will execute my plan, and you'll get a return. Well, the question is, will I get that return? What could go wrong? That's what this risk stack is about, all the things that could go wrong. During the development of the company, you are knocking down those risks. As you knock down those risks, the required potential multiple investment capital goes down because the risk is lower. And therefore, your valuation will go up and you can raise money at a higher valuation. That's what this whole process is about, is knocking down the risk. So how do you resolve a risk, and what does it mean to resolve a risk? Well, fundamentally, you make a claim, and if you don't know any better, it's sort of 50-50. Maybe it's true, maybe it's false. That's what's called the rule of insufficient reason. You don't know, so it's 50-50. Maybe if it's an outrageous claim, it's 10-90 that it's false. So the question is 50-50, that's pretty risky. And particularly if you've got a bunch of claims that are at risk like this, it's going to be very hard to invest in the company. And so what you want to do is resolve these claims by undertaking some activity that will get an answer to it. So for example, you claim there's a big market. What activity might you take? You could go do a survey of physicians and get them to support that this is a real need, and that, yes, if you have this target product profile, this would really address it. Or you could do a study. A good example of a risk-reducing study would be, you've got the principal investigator who has developed a bunch of great data in the lab, but it's never been reproduced outside of the lab. And as all of us in science know, it's challenging to reproduce data. And so that's considered a major risk. So a good risk-resolving activity is reproduce the study at an independent CRO or someplace else. So that's an example of a risk-resolving activity. Now, the thing about risk resolution is that you are not guaranteed to have it resolved the right way. In fact, if it's 50-50 when you start, then it may be 50% that it's going to resolve well and 50% that it's going to resolve poorly. Otherwise, it wasn't really 50-50 to start with. So you do the activity, and if it resolves well, now maybe you're 90% true and 10% false. But if it resolves poorly, maybe you're the other way around. That's what risk resolution is. It's not risk elimination. It is resolving a risk so you know whether what you've got is actually going to work.
So this is essentially de-risking an early stage asset.
That's right. That's right. The whole de-risking process looks something like this. You start off by asking, so we've got a risk level that's challenging, and no matter what, even if you are in the ballpark of risk and return for getting an investor, You don't want to have to raise your next round at the same low valuation that you raised the current round, so you have to drive your risk down. So you start by asking the question, could taking some actions reduce a risk? And from this, you develop a risk resolution plan. Here are a whole bunch of things that I can do to resolve the risk, and that falls into three categories. Can I fill in claims that I haven't addressed before? Can I fix some things easily and inexpensively on my own? I'll go out and talk to a bunch of doctors. I will collect my data, and they'll actually turn out to be information that I haven't actually presented in a way that shows that it resolves this risk as opposed to as just being interesting. Or are the things that are going to require cash for me to resolve? I have to go out and hire a regulatory consultant or something like that. Then once you've developed this plan, the question is, if you did this and everything resolved positively, would that make the company investable? Well, if the answer is no, if there isn't enough that you could do to resolve this risk reasonably, then the company probably can't become investable, and you ought to take your brilliance and your competence and apply it to another opportunity. However, if you think it could, then you go and you do steps 1 and 2, and you ask whether that's enough to make it investable. And if yes, great, go raise your money. And if no, then it's time to look at making these investments. Now, if you have some cash already, a lot of things will fall into the fix what you can category. So you can spend, 10, 15, 20, 30, 50, $100,000 to resolve a key risk with the funds that you have. Great. But often, particularly in very early stage companies, you don't have the funds that you need to resolve a key risk. The funds aren't that great. You're just totally strapped. And for this, you can get what we call a micro investment that's focused just on resolving that risk. And you then you do it. Hopefully it resolves it positively, and then you go back and do the loop until you get to financeability. So that's the risk resolution process in a quick process flow diagram. As I said, sometimes you can do it through grants, sometimes you can do it through capital that you've already raised. So now let me just talk briefly about micro investments, and I want to give a caveat that micro investments are something that we have done at Mass Medical Angels occasionally. It is something that we are talking, not by we, I mean myself and some folks at Life Science Nation, with a number of VCs around the world about putting together a much more structured and larger program around doing this. So this is a direction for the future that may or may not be available to you right now. But let me just talk about it in any case. So a micro investment to an investor is like buying a card in Texas Hold'em, right? Well, I see the hand that I've got. Sure, I'll buy another card and see whether it's going to turn out because it's a small amount of money. And I'll learn a little bit more and decide whether I want to fold or whether I want to keep going. The term sheet for a micro investment is designed to be super simple and transaction cost free. So you go to these special funds. We call it a save me because you're uninvestable now, and if you do this, maybe it'll save the company. There's no negotiation. The use of funds is specified to the particular risk-reducing project, and the valuation is very low because right now, if you're uninvestable, you can't raise money. But because it's such a small investment, there's not a lot of dilution involved. It's just low enough to make the potential multiple on invested capital large enough to make this small investment worthwhile, given the very high level of risk. The process, when it's done early, is that you have an institution that buys into this process. If you're trying to get it out of an institution, for example, if it's super early, you identify the risk areas, you develop a plan, the fund funds it, and you then go and execute it and review, and you do it again. The kinds of things that this might work, you could do market studies, you could do engineering or do some prototype development, efficacy or safety studies, particularly reproducing existing data or getting an early signal in the area. Reimbursement studies are good candidates, doing something on the cost of manufacture and regulatory plans. These are all good examples of things that micro investments could help to move you forward in getting towards investability. Now, the last component of risk assessment is pivoting. And unlike in software, where it's pretty easy to pivot. I'm doing this. Oh, no, that's not working. I can just redesign it. And particularly in the modern era, if your software isn't working, you sit down with Claude or ChatGPT and you said, hey, please make my software do this. And 3 hours later, you've got a whole new release. So easy to pivot in software, not so easy in life sciences, because even if you've got backup compounds, so let's just say that your lead program fails after phase one. Well, yeah, you can go back and take one of the backup compounds. You've got another shot on goal, but now you've got to go raise significant funds to de-risk that by getting preclinical safety and efficacy. And then if that looks good, the next investment is preclinical to IND to phase one, which is, I view as one large group as opposed to a series, unless there's a serious execution risk, which there shouldn't be if your team has already done it with one product. So that's a big additional investment that requires really going back and assessing what is the potential multiple for this new compound and is it worth the investment. Sometimes you can change indications if the first indication doesn't look, but again, it's pretty expensive to do. So, and sometimes also if it turns out that it's really expensive to do the manufacturing process for your novel ADC, then going back and redesigning that manufacturing process can also be expensive. So the cost of pivoting in life sciences can be pretty high. So let me just come back to this question of what makes a company uninvestable. So the total risk drives the potential the required potential multiple, the total capital needs, the exit value, these all drive the actual multiple, and the pre-money valuation. You can lower the pre-money valuation that you're offering your stock at now to increase the offered potential multiple in order to get to the required level. But the challenge is, do you have to lower it so much that you can't satisfy the founders, right? Maybe the founders' ego say, oh no, my company is definitely worth $50 million because I've got a brilliant invention. And that would be true if it actually were worth that. And that's a question for investors, right? Because you can value it all you want yourself. If you want to buy at that price, then it's absolutely worth that. And the other challenge is, will there be so much dilution that the founding team won't have enough of the company to be motivated? So it then comes down to, can you mitigate the risk sufficiently to resolve this potential disconnect and get yourself to the point where you're raising money at a pre-money valuation that is motivational and which is also acceptable to investors because of the multiple that it offers. So just to summarize, you look at the return, what's your potential exit value, how much capital required, what's the potential multiple on invested capital required. You then look at the risk systematically. You quantify it, you determine the required potential multiple based on the risk level, decide whether the company can accept the implications of that, and then you try to close the gap either by taking action or by doing micro investments. So you've gone through all of this, and you now have a company that you believe is investable. The next challenge is, can you sell it? And as you remember, go back, you have to have an investable plan, and then you have to have a solid marketing plan for taking that out. You can have a great investable plan. If you don't know how to sell, if you can't sell the concept, you're not going to raise the money. So what does it take to raise the money? Well, the fundraising process has three major components. You have to tell this investable story well. And there are a whole bunch of components to this. In branding and tagline, the elevator pitch, the deck, and so forth. All of these pieces that the folks at Life Science Nation are really expert at challenging and helping people put together. Then you have to run a real sales process, because fundamentally, if you're selling stock, you're a salesperson and you got to run a sales process. You need a target list of a whole bunch of investors. You need a customer relations management system to track and keep track of the status. And you have to do really diligent follow-up. And this includes going to things like Resi, where you get to test what you put together to see how effective it is. And get feedback. My experience has been it's super effective to go to a Resi, get a bunch of meetings, and test out your pitch and see what's working. And then eventually you'll have to close the sale, and there's a lot of processes in that. But if you don't get the first two pieces working right, then you're in trouble.
Yeah, Rick, I tell startup companies that That exactly as well. That one of the big values is not necessarily you go there and you walk away with the deal. It's that you get a ton of free consulting from top-notch people. Essentially, that's what's happening.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And you also you look them in the eye, you see what questions they're asked, you figure out if you have the framework in mind of here are all the things that I want to cover, you can actually ask what are called closing questions, right? Um, do you think the technology risk is acceptable here? What risk do you see as being the highest one? What would scare you away from this? These kinds of questions can pull the information out of the investor that you might not get otherwise. And structured questioning of the investors is a really good way to maximize what you get out of these conferences. So the challenge with the sales process, of course, is that founders hate it. Most founders are scientists. They're used to writing a grant. They're not used to getting up and pitching. And it's also incredibly time consuming. It really just eats time. And the founders want to be doing sciencey stuff as opposed to, dying for dollars. And most founders don't have the time to spend all this time doing it. And so, my view, and I've done this for some of my raises, is that you need to get help. So LSN Labs, they have a BD Assist program that helps you put all these things together. I think it's very effective. Going to Resi is a great way to get to know the folks and to pick up some of these capabilities. And if I were raising money now for a life science company, I would spend my time in Resi, and I wouldn't go to bio because bio is all late stage. Now, if you're a late stage and you're looking for a partnering deal, or if you're in phase 3 and you have to raise some more money, bio would be great. But if you're trying to raise early stage money, then bio is not really great because they don't have those investors. Those early stage investors go to Resi. So, uh, coming back to the challenge, this is all about climbing the investability mountain. And if you want to be able to effectively climb the mountain, it helps if you get somebody who's done it before to be a knowledgeable guide, sort of a Sherpa to lead you up the mountain. And it helps if you have all the right tools to do it. And if you don't have it now, ask for help because it is available.
So, Rick, there's one question here, and this is going back probably 25 minutes in your presentation, but how can a therapeutics company pursuing a novel target carrying unknown clinical safety and efficacy risks make a case for an attractive PMOIC?
So I would start with the exit. So how big an indication are you going after? And what do you think is, by the way, market sizing, bottoms up. Don't tell me, though the diabetes market is $23 billion a year, and we'll get 2% of it. And tell me how many of the subset of patients are you going to treat and how much you're going to be able to charge per patient or per treatment per patient. So do a bottoms up assessment on the size of the market. Then, do a back of the envelope. You can just start off by saying, okay, if this is the market and, somebody's going to require me in 7 years, let's just say that's how long you think it's going to take you to do clinicals and get through the whole process. So if somebody's going to acquire me in 7 years and, their revenue ramp at that point is going to look like this. And so this product is going to be worth, $1 billion to that company. So you start off by here's what I think the exit value is going to be. That's number one. Then you have to assess what all the different and then how much money you have to raise to get there. And you come back to, and let's just say that you've got a potential multiple that's nice and big. If you don't have a potential multiple that's nice and big, you got to reassess something. Then you got to ask, how do I convince people that it's worth the risk? Well, the first thing you do is you focus on all the other elements of the risk stack, right? You say there really is a market, there's a significant unmet need here. There isn't competition now or in the pipeline that's going to address it. And so this market is going to be big and be there when I get 7 years out. So that's and you can't really predict 7 years out, but you can give people comfort that it's pretty likely that the market is actually going to be there. Then you can go down to the economics. Well, this product that I'm working on, it's going to be inexpensive to make. And, here's the evidence for that. And the reimbursement is going to be pretty good. and here's the evidence for that. Here's why I think I can actually get paid a fair amount for this. So that's the economic risk. Regulatory risk, have a regulatory meeting and have them say, yeah, this looks like the right kind of plan and the right kind of scale for getting this approved. So now you've reduced the risk around how much capital you have to raise to get to the exit. Um, and then execution risk. The key thing in execution risk is, do you have the people on the team who have already done in some other circumstance whatever it is you have to do in the next set of milestones? So make the case around execution risk, financing risk. Sure, you got your act together, that you've got a good target list, that you've got a CRM to manage it, that you know what you're doing in fundraising, that you've got people that you're working with that help in fundraising. And for exit risk, identify the potential acquirers, look at their portfolios, and say, here's how it would fit and why it is I think there's still going to be a gap in 7 years when we're ready to go. So once you've addressed all the other risk areas, and it's just down to the technical risk, then you can start, and you're doing this all in parallel, you start chipping away at the technical risk aspects that you can chip away at now. So can you do some studies that will give people more confidence that efficacy is likely? Maybe that's a mechanism study. Maybe it is, we're going to do a couple of different animal models that it's a novel mechanism, but we're going to show that it's working in some way and we're getting some kind of a readout. So things that give confidence around safety, do an animal safety study, dose a bunch of rats up with it and see if they die or not. And do some preliminary safety data, do some preliminary efficacy data. If you haven't made the thing yet, make it, do a prototype. Those are the ways that you lower it early, knowing that the long tail of risk and the stuff that you're ultimately raising most of the money for is this technical risk. And if you've resolved the rest and the potential multiple is large enough, then you're going to be able to raise the money. If you don't answer those other questions, then it's going to be a lot more challenging unless you happen to find somebody, unless your mother is a VC, in which case you will always get the money.
Thanks, Rick. I think that was a pretty thorough answer to that question. We are at the top of the hour, so before we wrap up, I just want to give a bit of color of one thing you mentioned, the BD Assist program that we offer here at Life Science Nation. That's, in fact, almost literally what it sounds like. We act as your BD assistant, your business development assistant. We help you with your pitch deck based on our decade plus of teaching companies how to make the ultimate pitch deck, as well as their one pager. Then we use our database to find the ideal investor fits for you. And then we actually reach out on your behalf to those investors and get meetings for you, both through email, through LinkedIn, through various partnering conferences you might attend. So it's essentially where we do your BD assistant for you. And then you obviously have to show up at the meeting and you're in charge of presenting at the meeting. And we usually sit in on the meetings if you want and take some notes and help you along in that process. So it's a great program, and we're proud to have set up many, many meetings for our clients with well-aligned investors.
Uh,
So go ahead,
Sugano,
sorry.
I will be at Resi. I think I'm giving a workshop similar to this in the afternoon. So if I went too fast and you want to go over it again, you want to corner me there or before or after, come to Resi.
Excellent. That's good advice, Rick. And I'll throw up our um, the discount slide again. So just give me a second.
Let me stop sharing.
Where is it? Here we go. So I would like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. I'd like to thank Rick for presenting. Rick, I learned a lot. I'm sure our audience did. That was a lot of great information that I really think will benefit a lot of companies in understanding how to pitch in such a way that investors can say, okay, I understand how I'm going to both make some money on this or hopefully make some money on this. And how it falls into my level of risk profile that I'm willing to accept, how it works into the multiplier I'm looking to achieve, and really how it fits into my financial strategy, not just is it good science. So, Rick, thanks again for that. And I hope to see all of you at Resi San Diego, at Resi Boston, and then Resi JPM. So come to Resi, get a lot of investor meetings lined up, extend your cash runway, use that money to de-risk your assets, as Rick clearly explained how to do, and onwards and upwards to that licensing deal and acquisition or going to market yourself. Who knows? So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Rick.
My pleasure.